There is no story in the New Testament more famous than the one I am about to tell you. There is no scene in the Gospels more quoted, more painted, more preached, more remembered. A woman is dragged into the temple by a crowd of religious men. She has been caught in adultery. The men have stones in their hands. They throw her on the ground in front of Jesus. They demand that he tell them whether to stone her or to let her go. The law of Moses requires stoning. The crowd wants a yes. They are not really asking about the woman. They are not really asking about the woman. They are asking about Jesus, hoping to trap him into contradicting the law. Jesus does not answer. He kneels down and writes in the dust with his finger. The men keep demanding. Finally, he straightens up. He looks at them. He says 9 words that have become the most famous sentence Jesus ever spoke in the Gospels. He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her. The men, convicted by their own consciences, drop their stones one by one, beginning with the oldest, and walk away. Jesus is left alone with the woman. He asks her, "Where are your accusers? Has no one condemned you?" She says, "No one, Lord." He says, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." That story, my friends, is the Gospel of John, chapter 7, verse 53 through chapter 8, verse 11. Most modern Bibles bracket it, or footnote it, or insert a small notice. The notice will say something like, "The earliest manuscripts and many other ancient witnesses do not include John 7:53, 8:11. The notice is true. The story does not appear in any Greek manuscript of John's Gospel until the year 400 AD. It is not in Papyrus 66, which is the oldest copy of John's Gospel we possess, dated to around the year 200 AD. It is not in Papyrus 75 from the early 3rd century. It is not a Codex Sinaiticus or Codex Vaticanus, the 2 oldest complete Greek Bibles in existence, both written in the 4th century. The earliest manuscript of John's Gospel to contain the story of the woman caught in adultery is Codex Bezae, a Greek-Latin manuscript written around the year 400 AD. The most famous Jesus story in Christianity, my friends, the story of "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." The story your grandmother loved. The story preached from 1,000 pulpits last Easter. That story was added to John's Gospel by an unknown scribe 350 years after John wrote his Gospel, and is preserved in a single 5th century manuscript as the earliest witness. Tonight, I am going to tell you the whole story of the story, where it came from, why it was added, why some early church fathers, including St. Augustine, believed the story was true even though they admitted it was not originally in John, and what to do, my friends, with a story of Jesus that may have actually happened but was not written down by the apostle who put his name on the page where you read it today. I am Bishop Samuel. For 39 years, I have studied the original Greek manuscripts of the New Testament, including 6 years at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, where I read the photographic facsimiles of Papyrus 66, Papyrus 75, and Codex Bezae side by side. What I am about to share with you is the cleanest example in the entire New Testament of a story that is almost certainly true and almost certainly authentic to Jesus, and was almost certainly not written by John. Before I begin, subscribe to this channel. Drop a comment below telling me where you are watching from. I read every single one. And by the end of this video, I will give you the Latin name by which textual scholars know this passage, pericope adulterae, and the strange path by which the story traveled through the manuscript tradition before it found its permanent home in John chapter 8. Let me take you back, not to 400 AD. Further than that, let me take you to the year 90 after Christ in the city of Ephesus, where the Apostle John is sitting at a small wooden table writing the 4th Gospel. John writes a different kind of gospel than the other 3 apostles. His gospel is theological. It is structured. It is full of long discourses and sustained metaphors. It is the gospel of the Word made flesh, the gospel of the Good Shepherd, the gospel of the true vine. The Gospel of John reads, to any careful student of Greek prose, like a sustained meditation written by a man who had spent 60 years thinking about what he had seen as a young apostle. The story of the woman caught in adultery does not fit, my friends, into the surrounding structure of John 7 and John 8. I want you to follow me here, because the internal evidence is one of the strongest pieces of proof that the story was added. In John chapter 7, Jesus is teaching at the Feast of Tabernacles in Jerusalem. He is in a long, extended dialogue with the temple authorities about whether he is the Messiah. The dialogue continues through chapter 7, verse 52. Then, in the modern Bibles, the story of the woman caught in adultery is inserted at 753 through 811. Then, at John 8, verse 12, the dialogue picks up exactly where it left off. Then spake Jesus again unto them, saying, I am the light of the world. If you read John 7:5-2 and then skip directly to John 8:12, the dialogue is seamless. The woman caught in adultery passage is sitting in the middle of an otherwise continuous discourse, and the surrounding discourse does not change because of it. The Greek style is also different. Of the 173 Greek words in the pericope adultery, 14 words do not appear anywhere else in John's Gospel. The vocabulary, my friends, is wrong. The verb tenses are wrong. The narrative voice is wrong. To any first-year seminary student trained in Greek, the passage reads like a story written by a different person and inserted into John's text at a moment when the Greek reading community would not have noticed. The passage was not original. The passage is also, my friends, the wandering passage. I have to tell you this part because this part is fascinating. In the manuscript tradition, the story of the woman caught in adultery does not stay in one place. Different early manuscripts placed it in different locations. Some manuscripts put it where you find it now, after John 7:52. Others put it after John 7:36. Others put it at the very end of John, after John 21:25, as if a scribe was unsure where to fit it and decided to attach it as an epilogue. A small number of manuscripts placed it not in John at all, but in Luke, after Luke 21:38, where the temple disputes also occur. The story, in textual critical terms, is a floating tradition. It does not have a stable home in the New Testament. It was a story that the early Christian community knew, loved, told to each other, repeated in their homes and their early liturgies, but that no apostle had originally written down in any gospel. The scribes who eventually wrote it into the manuscript record did not agree on where it belonged, so they put it in different places. Eventually, the placement after John 7:52 won. By the 8th century, it was the standard location. By the time of the King James Bible in 1611, it was simply part of John 8. I want to tell you what St. Augustine said about this passage, my friends, because St. Augustine is the closest thing we have to a confession from the early church. St. Augustine of Hippo, who lived from 354 to 430 A.D., wrote in his treatise De Adulterinis Conjugiis, on adulterous marriages, a remarkable sentence about this story. He wrote in Latin that he was aware the passage was not in many Greek manuscripts of his day. He believed, however, that the story was true, and he speculated, and this is the remarkable part, that the story had been removed from the manuscript tradition by anxious scribes who feared that the example of Jesus forgiving a woman caught in adultery would encourage marital infidelity in the Christian community. Augustine was wrong about the direction of the transmission. The modern scholarly consensus is that the story was added in the late 4th or early 5th century, not removed. But Augustine's speculation tells us something important. Augustine, writing in the early 5th century, knew that the story had a problematic textual history. He knew it was not in the best Greek manuscripts. He knew it required explanation, and he gave his explanation honestly, in Latin, in a treatise that survives to this day. The early church, my friends, was honest about this passage. The honesty has been there for 1600 years. The footnotes in your modern Bible are not a betrayal of the early church. They are the early church's own admission finally surfacing in print after centuries of being buried in the pulpit. If this is hitting you, type the word stone in the comments. just that one word. I want to know how many of you have ever known that the most famous Jesus story in Christianity has this kind of complicated history, and subscribe to this channel, because what I am going to share with you in the next section of this video is the hardest question of all, the question of whether the story is still true. Here's what I believe, my friends, and I want to be careful, because what I am going to tell you is my belief, formed over 39 years of reading, and is not a settled position of the Catholic Church. I believe the story of the woman caught in adultery actually happened. I believe Jesus actually said, "Let he who is without sin among you cast the first stone." I believe the woman actually walked away. I believe Jesus actually said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." I believe this for 3 reasons. The first reason is that the story fits Jesus' character. It is consistent with everything he said and did across the 4 Gospels about mercy, about hypocrisy, about the Pharisees, about the law and grace. The story is not a story that an early Christian community would have invented to embarrass Jesus. It is a story consistent with the Jesus we already know from the Synoptic Gospels. The second reason is the wandering tradition itself. If a community had simply invented this story to fit a theological need, they would have placed it firmly in one gospel and left it there. The fact that the story floats, that different communities placed it in different gospels and different chapters, suggests that the story had an oral life independent of any single gospel author. People were telling each other the story for centuries before anyone wrote it down. That is the pattern of a real memory, not an invented fiction. The third reason is the early church's own treatment of the story. The early church fathers wrestled with it. They knew it was problematic in the manuscript tradition. They could have simply removed it. They did not. They kept it. They placed it. They argued about where it belonged. They wrote treatises about it. The behavior is the behavior of a church holding on to a memory it does not want to lose. So what I tell my readers, my friends, and what I tell you tonight is this: the story is most likely a true story of Jesus. The Apostle John did not originally write it. A 5th century scribe added it to the manuscript tradition because the church had been telling the story for 300 years, and the time had come to write it down. The church's instinct that the story was authentic was, I believe, correct. The church's editorial honesty about how the story got into the gospel was, I believe, lacking. You can hold both. The story is most likely real. It does not belong in John. The most likely original location, if it belongs anywhere in the canonical Gospels, is somewhere in the synoptic tradition, perhaps in Luke. But it survived in the church's memory because Christians could not bear to lose a story that revealed Jesus' mercy as completely as this one did. Tonight, before you sleep, open your Bible to John chapter 8. Read the pericope adultery, verse 53 of chapter 7 through verse 11 of chapter 8. Read it slowly. Hold both. The story is most likely true. The placement is editorial. The mercy is real. In my next video, my friends, I am going to teach you about something stranger, the number of the beast in the book of Revelation. You have known your whole life that the number is 666. The earliest surviving manuscript of the book of Revelation, Papyrus 1115, discovered in Oxyrhynchus, Egypt, and dated to the 3rd century, does not say 666, it says 66. It says 616. I will tell you how the number got changed, why it stayed changed for 1600 years, and what the original number 616 may have actually meant to the Apostle John when he wrote it down. Subscribe to this channel and hit the bell so you do not miss it. Until then, my friends, read The Woman Caught in Adultery tonight. Let the story be the story. Hold the questions about how it got there with a gentle hand. The mercy is older than the manuscript history. The mercy is the gospel. This is Bishop Samuel. May the peace of Christ remain with you, always.